So I'll begin right away with our first speaker, Professor Andreas Theophanous, who will address the subject of Erdogan and Davutoglu. What can we expect from them?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me thank American Hellenic Institute for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts in relation to this topic. The title given to me was the title of the team to address Erdogan and Davutoglu. What can we expect from them? Within this framework, I will try to address several issues, since it's not only Erdogan and Davutoglu that players in this. So, since we talk about 40 years, let me first of all give you a very short historical introduction, talking about in July 1974. On 13th of July 1974, we had in Cyprus an interim agreement in the negotiations taking place to address the intercommunal aspect of the Cyprus problem. And as a matter of fact, you had Aldikashti from Turkey, constitutional advisor of Mr. Dektash at the time, and the Kleris from Greece, coming very close to an agreement to be ratified on July 16th in 1974. Nevertheless, the Greek Cypriot press at the time, and the mainland Greek press, was not focusing on the fact that there was going to be an outcome in the negotiations, but on the clash between Marketos and Junta. So we had the coup on the 15th of July, and 5 days later, on 20th of July, Turkey invaded. When, on the day of the invasion, Turkey declared that its objective was, there were two objectives. First, to re-establish constitutional order in Cyprus, and second, to protect the Turkish Cypriot minority community. On July 23rd, the junta collapsed in Greece, and the putschist regime in Cyprus also collapsed. At the time, Turkey had under its control about 8% of the land of the Republic of Cyprus, and acting President Kyriakis at the time, who he immediately suggested to the UN and Mr. Dektash and to the international community that we return immediately to the 1960 constitution. Turkey said that that was too late. And yet we proceeded about 5 weeks with the Turkish onslaught. The term ethnic cleansing came in the vocabularies during the Yugoslav crisis. But basically we had one, a major one, in Cyprus. So retrospectively, if we see what Turkey had done in Cyprus, is that first of all, it destroyed the constitutional order. It did not re-establish it. And second, the other point that I would like to share with you is in the process of also destroying the Turkish Cypriot community, for which supposedly came to protect, in the sense that the Turkish Cypriots are a minority in the northern part of Cyprus today as well. The other element I want to share with you is that Prime Minister Davutoglu, since we talked about him, had mentioned in several speeches and statements and in his recent book on Turkey, Strategic Depth, that Cyprus is very important to Turkey, irrespective of the fact that whether there are or there are no Turkish Cypriots on the island, that Turkey has its own plans. I would also, because we had at the beginning, let me go a little forward and then come backward to continue about a two-state solution. I'm not sure that Turkey would accept a clear partition of the island. I'm not sure about that. As a matter of fact, I doubt it. Turkey has an interest to have strategic control of the whole island through a loose federal structure on the island of two constituent states, that they mind their own business, but when it comes to geopolitics, Ankara has the final word on that. So I don't think there is, on the part of Turkey, an interest for a two-state solution. Now, after July 74, Cypriots, Greek Cypriots were in a real shock. They thought that this would take some time before things go back to normal. These things, of course, didn't happen. Greek Cypriots went from one position to another, meaning talking about the leadership, nothing came out. The European Union when we acceded in 1990, there were renewed hopes that its value system and also particular interest on different sides would eventually push for a Cyprus settlement. This didn't happen. As a matter of fact, Cypriot Greeks found out that whenever there were dates important to Turkey, that it had to conform with its EU obligations, most of the pressures were not directed towards Turkey, but they were directed towards the Cypriots in order to accommodate Turkey. As a matter of fact, we had pressures from Washington, from the European Union, and occasionally from Athens to conform to that. So this is the whole thing, in the whole issue in relation to how it proceeded. In 2004, we had the Annan Plan. The Annan Plan was rejected by Greek Cyprus by about 76%, not because there was ultranationalism in Cyprus, but because we simply thought that its implementation would make the status quo worse, in the sense that the Republic of Cyprus would be dissolved and be replaced by a new state structure which would, in one way or another, be influenced more by Turkey. So that was rejected. Cyprus lost its moral high ground after 2004 for various reasons. First, it didn't have a narrative, and never really explained why it rejected, and never really put forward what it really was. I'm afraid that here I would not fully agree with the official leaderships, both in Athens and Nicosia. I think that what is being the objective, official policies of Cyprus, and supported by Greece, of course, in relation to the biconal federation, if successful, I don't think they will create more problems than resolve. And I have been very open about that in the last few years. So I think there is a lack of clear vision. The other element, Cypriots failed when they were accused for the no. They failed to explain that democracy is not only setting a ballot, but respecting the outcome of a ballot. I mean, you have a lot of referenda in Europe, and people say yes or no on whatever issue, but nobody bitches against somebody if they don't agree with what he does. In the case of Cyprus, when we said no, when I visited various capitals, including Washington at the time later on, I had seen, I would say, a negative, sometimes a hostile environment, as if we had done something terribly wrong. Again, I repeat, democracy is not only setting a ballot, and I'm saying this not only as an American trade professional, but also as a Greek from Cyprus, is respecting the outcome. The other element, talking about the substance of the Cyprus question, the Cyprus question has different dimensions. Yes, the bicommunal dimension, in other words, relations between Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots, and power sharing and everyday life are important, yet there are other dimensions which are even more important. And I'm talking about the Greco-Turkish dimension, the international dimension, the European dimension, the invasion aspect, and so on. Yet the bicommunal negotiations are there. As they go on time and again, they give the impression that the major problem is that it's two communities that they cannot get along, and that's the crux of the problem. Yes, we had problems in the past with the Cypriots. The past was not rosy. On the other hand, there were positive periods and negative periods. But that's not the most important aspect of the problem. I think that both communities today, given the outcome, given the recent experiences, both after '74 and during the economic crisis as well, we do feel that if there was truly an atmosphere where we could freely negotiate, I think we could have better odds. But nothing substantial takes part in the northern part of Cyprus without the consent or approval of Turkey. So this is another issue that I want to share with you. The other element which is important is what kind of a solution to the Cyprus question. And here I would like to share two major points with you. Demographic issues are important everywhere. and so do communal relations. In the United States, in 1960, Kennedy was not elected because it was the turn of an Irish Catholic background politician to be elected. It was a triumph of politics. And in 2008 in the United States, we had the election of Obama, not because it was the turn of an Afro-American politician to be elected. Again, it was the outcome of circumstances and the triumph of politics. In the case of Cyprus, there is an insistence to give us a constitution which would return us back to the 19th century, with the Ottoman-style constitutional constitution where everything revolves around which community you belong to. I'm a very proud Greek Cypriot, but I don't define myself only as a member of the Greek Cypriot community. Life has much more fun being other things as well. I mean, like, it's not only being part of the community, and I don't like in our country politics to be defined by communal dimensions. Now, there is another element. When I hear Erdogan and Davutoglu speak about the future of Turkey, let me tell you the way they describe it. When they say, we would like the millions of Turks, irrespective of ethnic, religious, and linguistic background, to have the same opportunities, and we aspire to an integrated country. So the differences in that country, they argue, should not be a factor of the equation of the Turkey of tomorrow. I respect that very much. Nevertheless, they don't give us, they don't allow us to have the same vision of Cyprus, where ethnic elements, religious elements, linguistic background should not be the major factor in defining our politics. Turkey is a country of 80 million people, 800,000 square kilometers, and that's the vision of an integrated society. We Cypriots, when we have a similar vision for a country less than 1 million, less than 10,000 square kilometers, we are not allowed to have that vision. And many times when I talk with American officials, I tell them about this. And then I tell them, although we would like to have an integrated Cyprus and taking a value system based mostly from your constitution, the American Constitution. Okay. On the other hand, they talk about what is being discussed, which contradicts the value system of the United States, and where it was implemented, it has backfired. You can see what's happening in Bosnia today, which the constitution they wanted to give, it has failed. Even the Belgian constitution is not working, and even there, where Belgium is in the heart of Europe, Brussels, capital of the European Union, I doubt whether Belgium would have been sustained as one country if it wasn't for Brussels to be the capital of the European Union. So we don't want to, so I don't share the vision of President Stasiadis, I must be honest with you, because if implemented, it will create more problems than it will resolve. Now, talking about the economic crisis and the energy issue, even before the crisis in Cyprus, repeatedly several diplomats from various Western countries, including this one, as well as journalists, we discussed, can we put together and address the issue of the economic crisis, energy issue, and the Cyprus problem. In principle, nothing wrong with it. The point though is that we wouldn't like the economic crisis to be a factor because of our current weaknesses to be used against us in a blackmailing way. It may backfire. I think it will backfire. The other element I want to share, since we talk about the economic crisis in Cyprus and Greece, let me put it this way. Yes, we had excesses in both countries, but the recipes given by the Troika and the European Union are disastrous. To paraphrase it, they are giving similar recipes that Hoover used at the beginning in the 30s, and the crisis in the United States got deeper. There is no, I don't expect coming out of the crisis with these recipes. So it will be more problematic, I think, in the years to come. Now, what happens in relation to Erdogan and Davutoglu? I go back to the question that I was asked to address. Turkey has been consistent in relation to Cyprus. It doesn't recognize the right of the Republic of Cyprus to exist. Just to paraphrase our Israeli friends when they say we don't negotiate if the other side does not recognize the sacred right of Israel to exist. So in the case of Cyprus, Turkey makes it, they are very blatant about it, very blunt, that they have called recently, in a paper given to the European Union in a policy draft, defunct Republic of Cyprus. It just doesn't exist. They say it very openly. As a matter of fact, this sparkled some discussions in Cyprus and Athens over this statement of Turkey, where the Greek government overpassed it. So, for me, it is inconceivable to have a solution of the Cyprus question which pushes aside the Republic of Cyprus. Now, in relation to the issue of the Turkish Cypriots, now, let me take this. In 1960, Cyprus was basically a bicommunal society. Today, Cyprus is not a bicommunal society. Given European Union and globalization, Cyprus has peoples from various parts of the world. The Greeks are majority. Turkish Cypriots are one of the communities, but if I take people from third countries, they are more than Turkish Cypriots. So if I am Italian or Lebanese living in Cyprus, in order to have political rights, do I have to associate with the Greek community or the Turkish community? So we must look for an integrated society with elements of local autonomy. But the current model, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Now, Erdogan and Davutoglu again, they are very assertive about the future of Turkey. Cyprus is one of their issues, but not the most important one. For us, Cyprus may be the most important issue. Even for Greece, Cyprus is not the most important issue. So for Turkey, it's not the most important issue. But in their vision, they're very blatant about what they say and what they not. What concerns me is the following. Since 1974, Turkey had a demographic policy in Cyprus. A policy where, through colonization, it would change the demographic structure of the island. Several Turkish Cypriots told me in private that Turkey does not trust them because yet they had their clash with the Greek Cypriots, but after 1974, many Turkish Cypriots said that Greek Cypriots are less evil for them than Turkey itself. So they were prepared to live and work for an integrated society. So Turkey wants to make sure that there is a bulk of population in the northern part of Cyprus, which would be majority initially in the northern part, and secondly in the whole island. Now, what is the difference between the past and the present? Past leaders of Turkey never made a point of it. They did it without saying it. These two, they are open about it. For example, Erdogan, in his first visit as president of Turkey, in his first visit a month ago, 1st of September, in Cyprus, he asked people there to have more children. And a week later, and he asked for incentive to have more children. And a week later, Davutoglu, he said he wanted to be a matchmaker in marriages between the Turkish troops and the girls living in the northern part of Cyprus. So they are very open about what they want. They found the Republic of Cyprus a population policy. And in relation to the economic crisis, it's unfortunate that we are losing people living to find jobs because we have high unemployment. So, yes, we are in front of great challenges. We have to address economic crisis. We have to address the Cyprus question. And I think it's time for new approaches in all aspects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Theophanous. Nick Karambelas will now address us on a textbook case, Cyprus that is, for international law, national sovereignty, and the exclusive economic zone.
I'd just like to open with a personal note, but it's relevant for the reason that we're here for 40 years. My first job in Washington was the American Hellenic Institute. I worked for Jean and Leon Stavro, who was the executive director at that time. The reason I bring it up is, of course, how honored I felt being having that as my first job, and also the confidence that Gene showed in a young lawyer bumbling around trying to find out what he's supposed to do. And I still am, I guess. But we had a conversation. This was in August of 1979. That's when I joined AHI. And we were talking, obviously, about the Cyprus issue, but it was kind of like, well, this is going to be resolved fairly shortly. Let's talk about, the long-term goals and mission of AHI. But we'll be dealing with that, and the Cyprus issue will kind of be, resolved one way or the other. And here we are, 40 years later, and we're still dealing with it, and it's still, AHI is still here doing a lot of what it was doing back in the 1970s. The reason I wanted to talk about the exclusive economic zone is because this has added a new element to the Cyprus issue. The exclusive economic zones are important because there are, as we all know, important resources in the economic exclusive zones within Cyprus and in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the ability to exploit these resources, mainly hydrocarbons, which are oil and gas, are going to have a very positive impact on the future of Cyprus, the future of the Eastern Mediterranean generally. If you, by way of example, see what the finds in the North Sea did for Norway and Scotland. It's very important, but of course it comes with legal issues, raises legal issues. Just very briefly, the law of the sea goes back to ancient times, and ancient Greeks, ancient Cypriots were very much involved. In fact, the Rhodian Sea Law was the first codified law of the sea, and that was done in 800 BC. And to this day, the Law of the Sea Treaty, which I'll discuss briefly, still has principles from the Rhodian Sea Law from 800 BC in the treaty. We'll be discussing the UN Law of the Sea Treaty because it's relevant for the EEZ. I should note that the treaty was concluded in 1982, and as of today, 166 countries are signatories to it and have ratified it. The three big exceptions are the United States, Israel, and Turkey. Okay. I'm going to do a little bit of a novelty act, so I hope no one has objections. Just to a brief overview of the law of the sea as it relates to the various zones. Here we have the land and a baseline, and the baseline is from where the measurement of these various zones is made. Anything landward of this baseline is internal waters, and a country has absolute sovereignty. The territorial sea goes out 12 miles, and again, in that area, the country has absolute sovereignty. Then there is a contiguous zone, which is measured, again, from the 24 miles from the baseline, and that's where a nation does not exercise sovereignty, but is able to use for its customs, regulations, sanitary regulations, that kind of thing. And then we have the exclusive economic zone, which is measured for 200 miles from the edge of the baseline of the territorial sea out 200 miles. And then finally we have the continental shelf, which has no limit, but is simply measured by where does the slope of the landmass end as it extends out. Okay. The important zone for our purposes is, of course, the exclusive economic zone. And the difference, the importance of it is that a nation can exploit the resources from the base up to the surface of the water, as well as the resources below the subsoil, below the seabed. With the continental shelf, a nation can only exploit resources that are in the continental shelf. It cannot exploit fisheries and other resources that are above the subsoil. Well, the issue here is that an exclusive economic zone must be declared under the Law of the Sea Treaty. In other words, a nation doesn't have an inherent right to it. A nation must declare it. By contrast, the continental shelf is inherent to the land to which it's connected. Now, Cyprus has done this. Cyprus has declared its exclusive economic zone. It has passed the implementing legislation. And note that islands under the Law of the Sea Treaty have their own exclusive economic zones. And we're going to see the significance of that in a moment. So Cyprus has, all around the landmass of Cyprus, declared its exclusive economic zone. Cyprus uses the principle that's embodied in the Law of the Sea in measuring its exclusive economic zone when it overlaps with another nation. In other words, if two nations are opposite one another and their exclusive economic zones overlap because there's less than the 200-mile limit, the Law of the Sea Treaty says you resolve the issue by drawing a line in the middle. End of story. And that is the basis upon which Cyprus has negotiated its economic zones with Lebanon, most importantly Israel, and Egypt. This is the declared exclusive economic zone for Cyprus is this area right here. And as you can tell, Cyprus has overlaps, and these countries have concluded agreements within the terms of the treaty. Now, where this gets important is in the next slide. We'll see Turkey claims as its exclusive economic zone this area. And we'll go around to show the claims that Turkey makes in each of the compass points there. Let's take the western waters here, west of Cyprus. Here is what Turkey claims as its exclusive economic zone. As you note, it draws the line there and it cuts off at Crete. It also has a very small exclusive economic zone here, and that is the island of Castellorizio. If anyone here is from that island, I'd love to meet you because the island is about the size of this room. But Turkey claims that Castellorizio doesn't dispute that that's Greek territory, but says it doesn't have its own exclusive economic zone. And if you see what would happen if the Turkish position prevailed, you see that the Cyprus zone and the Greek zone are cut off. And that would give Turkey enormous advantages in terms of exploiting the exclusive economic zone. Turkey claims the basis for it, it doesn't adhere to the median line, the equidistant line. It says, well, this is a special circumstance. And the Law of the Sea Treaty does provide for special circumstances. Special circumstances, however, are supposed to be worked out by agreement between the parties. And if they are unable to agree, to submit the case to the International Court of Justice or some international arbitration panel. Well, Turkey has been a loser in just about every international court it has ever gone to, most particularly the European Court of Human Rights. Now, the Cypriot cases have been there, but leave those aside. These are cases that were brought by their own citizens for violation of the rights of their own citizens. So it's highly unlikely, in fact impossible, that Turkey is ever going to agree to take this issue to the International Court of Human Rights. Turkey takes its position that these are special circumstances also in the Aegean. I won't get into the Aegean, but that's its consistent position. Now, everywhere you look in the law of the sea is a special circumstance. Okay, that's the Western waters. Now, Turkey makes claims in the north of Cyprus, the east of Cyprus, and the south of Cyprus. And they're each different claims. I'd like to go through each one of them. Here we have what Turkey claims. They claim that this area north is the continental shelf of the TRNC and Turkey. So you can see it's just about in the middle. Turkey claims it can conclude this agreement because it recognizes, I use the term TRNC, that's in quotes, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Well, only, of course, Turkey recognizes that area as a state, and so it has concluded a continental shelf agreement between Turkey and the TRNC. So Turkey claims, no, that's a TRNC exclusive zone, a continental shelf. On the eastern part here, Turkey makes a conflicting claim. It says, well, this is the zone of the TRNC, but the TRNC can't declare the EEZ because no one recognizes it. Well, so we're doing it on behalf of the TRNC, but the reason that, and we recognize the TRNC as a state, but the reason the TRNC can't do it on its own is because the TRNC is not a state. So they are caught up in a legal conundrum in this area. South of Cyprus, the claim kind of bounces back and forth. One claim is that, well, Cyprus can't claim this as its exclusive economic zone because this has to be exploited for the benefit of both communities. At other times, Turkey claims that because it does not recognize the Republic of Cyprus, there's really nothing in between Turkey and here, so that that's part of Turkey's exclusive economic zone. Those are the positions. What we can see from this is the legal issues that arise are important and they're complex. And just saying that we can go and drill in this area and be rich someday is not sufficient. There has to be a resolution of these legal issues in order for there to be exploitation of these resources, and I would submit even a settlement of the Cyprus issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I'd like to now call on Doug Bandow of the Cato Institute to address us on the emerging strategic relationship of Israel, Greece, and Cyprus.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure to come and speak at an AHI event. It's certainly good to see Gene again and have his book out. Very happy to have that. And I'll try to be brief so we have time for Q&A. I think there's a lot of issues here on the table. I'd like to speak on the emerging strategic relationship of Israel, Greece, and Cyprus. And I think it's a difficult time if you're interested in Cypriot or Greek issues to kind of get on the table here in Washington. And I'm not sure if that's a bad thing. There's so much bad news going on that to some degree the inability to be noticed in Washington might be a good thing. I mean, there's terrorism and wars and rumors of wars and all sorts of stuff going on. I mean, the good news, I think, is that for both Greece and Cyprus is that they live in peace. They're part of the Western world, that democratic, despite economic problems, are certainly part of the larger order that we all belong to. So I think there's good news there, that they're carrying on as genuine members of, I'd say, the Western Alliance in a broad sense, as opposed to some other countries which are technically members but are always living up to their obligations. I think the big thing that we see changing in recent years for both Greece and Cyprus is their relationship with Israel. And that has important implications for their relationship with the United States. And what we see in that area, I think very importantly, is movement where both Cyprus and Greece in many ways are moving past Turkey, where Turkey in the past has had a great advantage. Today I think there's a real challenge to that in terms of where it stands. And in many ways I think we can look at this as saying what a difference a few years make. That it wasn't too long ago that in Washington Turkey was the indispensable ally, the indispensable Muslim partner of the United States. It was the secular democracy, it was the friend to Israel, it was headed towards Europe, it was a bulwark of American security. You kind of hear all these sorts of arguments being made in various forums and in government offices. And it was very difficult, if that was one's kind of the official perception of where Turkey stood, it was very hard for either Greece or Cyprus to make a lot of progress in Washington. Because for all of the kind of moral rhetoric that one often hears from Washington politicians, practicality rules in many areas of foreign policy. So if your view is that Turkey is somehow indispensable, all these other things kind of fall to the side and you try to take care of them, kind of at the bottom as opposed to making them priority issues. And I think that what we're seeing is a change in that today. That, in a sense, all of these pillars of kind of Turkey's importance are busted. That, in the early years at least, whether it was because of careful calculation or luck or whatnot, the kind of Erdogan and the AKP kind of fell into the sense that they were liberal, they were restoring democracy. The Erdogan was the great friend of President Obama. Kind of all this stuff was coming out 2008, 2009, 2010. But I think by 2014, basically it's all gone. That kind of all these supposed justifications really are ebbing away. I mean, the first, of course, is that the secular nature of the Turkish government. I mean, Erdogan is certainly I think, kind of crazy knife-wielding jihadist, but you certainly look at the AKP, you get a sense that there's a lot more Islamic sense there than one would have thought when they were first elected back in 2002. Clearly there's been a change in attitude in terms of where that government is going, that one can't look at Turkey today with quite the same sense of certainty in the future of where it's going in terms of religious affairs and how that impacts on society. The democratic nature that in the early days challenged the military, but today many folks are very concerned about a much more authoritarian direction in the Turkish government. Liberals who in the early years embraced Erdogan because he moved against the kind of nationalism and the militarization of Turkish society, today very nervous. Businessmen, pressure on them, journalists in jail. When you look at this, suddenly the picture of Turkey doesn't look nearly as nice as it once did. The sense of being a friend of Israel. I mean, of course, the Turks don't consider themselves to be Arabs, but you've got to be the Muslim friend of Israel is very important. Today, that relationship, if not quite in tatters, is certainly much less friendly, much more questionable over the long term where it's going. The notion of being headed towards Europe, a member of the European Union, I'm not sure if that was ever realistic given the attitudes of a number of European countries who were quite clearly willing to put issues of politics and culture ahead of economics. But I think today it's not even clear that Erdogan really wants to be part of Europe and where Turkey is going. I doubt that it will ever be officially part of Europe. It may have other relationships, but unlikely to be a member of the EU. And finally, the notion of being the bulwark of American security in the Middle East, the bridge between East and West. I mean, all these kind of things flow off the tongue. Doesn't look nearly as persuasive after refusing to back the United States in the 2003 war against Iraq, and then more recently being notably absent from this grand coalition that's going to smash ISIL. The Turks seem busy. Kind of other priorities, other things going on, please don't bother us, we'll get back to you. Again, hard to look at that and say these are really the close friends and allies that America has presumed that they were going to be. Now, American policy hasn't changed dramatically yet, and I think we were actually talking at lunch, why is this? And I think there's a sense of living on kind of the fumes of the past. There's kind of an overhang, a hangover of kind of past assumptions in terms of the importance of Turkey. But I think that these changes in every area really have opened up the way for change. And over the long term, I have trouble seeing how this kind of attachment to Turkey can be maintained in coming years. And I think at some point that means that there's a real opportunity for both Greece and Cyprus in terms of their relationships and bringing these issues more to the fore and getting greater attention and more sympathetic attention. It may not be quick, but I do think the landscape is changing. And it certainly looks to me like in Cyprus there's a recognition of some of this going on. There's an interview, the president was discussing his meetings in America and talked about the question of being a strategic partner. And his comment was that when he would talk to the vice president, we spoke about Cyprus' strategic realignment with Western institutions and security structures, its role as the last outpost of Western alliance in an increasingly tumultuous and violent Eastern Mediterranean. He talked about the enhanced relationship with Israel and how that played into it. And he looked even beyond that. He noted the importance of energy and how that was providing greater opportunities for Cyprus. And it certainly looks to me like there's a recognition then, of the affected countries, that there is potential change coming, and I think that can be addressed. And I do think the crux of this emerging relationship has been this deterioration of Turkish-Israeli relationship. There's a lot there, I don't need to go into detail. Turkey actually recognized Israel back in 1949, though it had very varying levels of diplomatic acknowledgement. A full embassy was established back in 1980, but before that there was a covert intelligence relationship, full ambassador status in 1991, 5 years later an FTA, a number of different military cooperation, a relationship that one saw between Turkey and Israel you did not see between Israel and any of the Arab neighbors. And clearly Turkey had a unique relationship with Israel. It was an important one that seemed to work pretty well until 2009. The famous moment was at the Davos World Economic Forum when Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan took on President Shimon Peres of Israel and denounced him the issue of Gaza. The following year was the flotilla heading towards the Gaza Strip. The Israelis went on a ship, 9 Turkish citizens were killed. I mean, since then, there's kind of the outgrowth of that. There's a lot of anti-Semitism and kind of in attitudes and in press in Turkey. Groups like the Gulen movement have been denounced as being, pro-Israel, which is considered to be a bad thing from those providing the denunciations. So what you see there is a pretty significant deterioration. Certainly the Israelis feel that. Now I want to emphasize that doesn't mean there's no contact. There's still kind of backdoor military and economic activities. Indeed, trade has increased in recent years. So it's not like the entire relationship is ruptured, but we clearly see there's a limit in terms of the Turkish-Israeli relationship. And the Israelis have come to understand very clearly that this is no longer a relationship that they can rely upon. There's no certainty there that what had once seemed to be a foundational relationship for Israel in a very tumultuous region no longer seems to work. And I think that kind of along with this change in the Turkish-Israeli relationship has been the energy discoveries. Now, as we've heard, obviously there's a complexity here in terms of what you can get. I was actually involved in the Reagan administration law of sea treaties. He brought back all those horrible memories of sitting through, these sessions and everybody debating all this stuff. But it does show, the difficulty. The energy companies want certainty, people want certainty of tenure, so there are difficulties in getting at some of that. But what we find is there are fields of energy for the Cypriots as well as Israel. And there's been a certain merger then of the interests of them, and especially because Turkey has and Hamas has made their own claims. And Turkey has threatened Cyprus, and threatened to interfere with any exploration, that actually has moved in a fairly significant way Israel towards Cyprus and also ultimately Greece. Because from an Israeli standpoint, an obvious way to get this out, the pipelines, it's through Cyprus, it's through Greece, it wants to get gas to Europe, that's the way to do it. And of course, increasingly Europe is interested in liquefied natural gas and other energy sources because of their reliance today on Russia. And given what's going on in Crimea and their relationship with the European Union, there's more than enough going on that Europeans don't like to be limited in terms of kind of stuck relying on Vladimir Putin and hoping that he'll be a nice guy in the coming winter. So that indeed, from Israel's standpoint, has increased the value of both Cyprus and Greece, both members of the European Union. Its relationship with them also, I think, helps to some degree to provide a counterweight to otherwise a support for Palestinians and some, there's rising anti-Semitism in Europe itself and criticism of Israel. That building this relationship has given kind of a bridgehead for Israel into the European continent and is kind of a reason then for coming together. There's also a growing military relationship. There's a long list I won't go through in terms of military maneuvers and other things that Israel has been engaged in with Cyprus and particularly with Greece. And some of them they moved from, in the past, kind of search and rescue to repelling invaders. And you can kind of imagine who the invader might be. It's probably not going to be the Americans. You can kind of fill in the blank who you think that possible one is. Again, I don't want to oversell this. I think that Israel is certainly not particularly interested in handing out security guarantees and whatnot. Nevertheless, I think what we see is a real closeness developing here of a shared interest in terms of economic development, shared concern for security and stability in an increasingly messy world, a shared concern over where Turkey is going, since nobody quite knows. I don't think the Turks know, and nobody outside of Turkey actually knows. And a shared commitment, I think, to working with the United States. Certainly Greece over the years. I mean, Greece, it's always been easy in Washington to overlook Greece. Greece is not the problem child. I mean, Turkey's the one that complains about everything that gets the attention. Greece has been a very strong ally over the years. Cyprus, though it hasn't had quite the same relationship, nevertheless, I think shares the same kind of foundational civilizational values. It's there. Israel, of course, has been a very long-standing ally of the United States. Today, we're kind of seeing all of these coming together at a time where Turkey is proving to be disruptive to Europe, not particularly helpful to the United States, and being potentially harmful and undercutting Israel. It is, I think, a moment where you're seeing emerging relationship, which could change the texture, I think, of developments in the coming years. I don't want to oversell, but I think this is an important moment, which we haven't had, in many years. That for so long, whenever you get involved in this issue, everybody just tells you how important Turkey is. I think we're at a moment where a lot of folks in Europe, a lot of folks in the United States are suddenly wondering whether or not that's the case. And if that becomes a broader sense of disquiet, I think there are opportunities for Cyprus and Greece, and those opportunities are enhanced by their relationship with Israel. Thank you.
I thank all the speakers for their very interesting remarks, and I'm happy to say we're a little ahead of schedule, so we have some extra time for questions and answers, and I hope we have some. If you do have any questions, again, please come to the microphone in the center, identify yourself, and keep it to a question. In order to give you all some time to think of good questions, I'm going to take the prerogative and ask one of my own. And I direct this to any of the panelists who wishes to answer. I think all of you, in one form or another, have touched upon the change in the dynamics of the region that have presented us with something of a new opportunity to resolve the Cyprus issue, to resolve legal issues involving the exclusive economic zone and so forth. I'd like you each to elaborate on that a little bit, and particularly insofar as the crisis with the Islamic State now adds a new factor into the mix. I think, Doug, you said what a difference a few years make. I would paraphrase that and say what a difference a few hydrocarbons make. But now I think we have to add what a difference a new political dynamic in the immediate neighborhood makes, and what opportunities, if any, it gives us. And I'd like you to address that with an idea to telling us what you think, how this might unfold, and what you think the timetable might be.
Well, is this still? Yeah. I think, as I said in my question to the ambassador earlier, my concern is that not so much, he addressed the issue as Cyprus participating in the degrading, destroying of ISIS where it was in the Middle East and to support those efforts. My question was really directed to, and we obviously have concern about the Christian communities in those areas, but in Cyprus you have a Christian community sitting right opposite a Muslim community that we should be concerned may become just as radicalized by ISIS forces as has happened in Syria and Iraq. So I think it is a brand new factor, and it would have the effect, at least in my mind, of turning what has always been a communal dispute between two communities into a religious dispute. And if that were to happen, I think you can forget about any discussions on a settlement.
If I may, let me say that Cyprus question it didn't really ever have a religious dimension, in the sense that both communities never focused really on religious issues. Okay, that's number one. Now, the Middle East is changing as an outcome of several factors. So, first of all, I'm not so sure the Arab Spring was an Arab Spring after all. Point number two. In other words, there were regimes that were authoritarian and removed, but there was more trouble and destabilization than otherwise. Third, in relation with the Cyprus question, what I would say is that Turkey is very consistent with its policies. One of the issues that I'm thinking about is that if ever the established official policy of the Republic of Cyprus comes to reality, despite it's not by common federation, I'm afraid it will create more problems than it will resolve. And both empirically, from an empirical perspective, countries with similar models, it didn't work. And second, modern political thinking suggests that countries which are based, their constitution and ways of life based on ethno-nationalist pillars, again, are not sustainable. Plus, again, we have this economic crisis where it affects our demography very negatively. So, although Turkish policy are creating questions in some circles in the European Union and in the United States, I don't think that that's enough to change things. So, as a Cypriot Greek, what I would like to see first is overcoming the economic crisis and having a roadmap about what we want, and then try to sell that. Okay. I think for the last 40 years, we're going around in circles about something which we talk about, but it doesn't really exist.
I think that the rise of the Islamic State has done a couple of things, one of which is to raise the importance of the region strategically. I mean, the administration a few years ago wanted to have a so-called pivot or rebalancing to Asia, which has pretty much disappeared. I mean, they moved a few thousand Marines to Australia, just enough for the Chinese to notice and get irritated, but not enough to actually make any difference if anything happened. I mean, kind of typical Washington policy. I mean, stupid at both ends. And then, of course, you have crisis in Crimea and Russia and Georgia and all sorts of things going on. And this reminds us that, in fact, there are other areas and how the Middle East has kind of come back in the Mediterranean. And in doing that, it does raise the real issue of who's America's allies, who can it count on. I mean, there's now this grand coalition, I've lost count if it's 20 or 40 countries or 60, whatever. Of course, most of that means people saying, yes, we love what you're doing, and they're counted as a member of the coalition. And from an American standpoint, I mean, at least I count more if you provide airplanes that bomb as opposed to stand by clapping as the airplanes take off. And so far, what we're finding out is that Turkey is one of the countries that stands by and doesn't even clap for the airplanes. We can't even use our base there. You know, the question then is, well, what is the use of having an air base if you can't use it? What kind of an ally is this? Of course, at the same time, the Turks are demanding the Article 4 consultation because one of their planes is shot down by the Syrians. And Secretary General Rasmussen of NATO declares, we will defend the Turks if they need it. And I'm trying to think, what, ISIL is going to take over Ankara? I mean, come on. I mean, so you have everybody's kind of kowtowing to Turkey and how we will help them, and Turkey, of course, reciprocates not at all. So I think what's happening, I think, here is that this is all being brought up. It came up in 2003 and kind of disappeared pretty quickly. The U.S. had a very quick victory. I mean, everything else that transpired turned out to be pretty disastrous, but you couldn't really blame the Turks for that. I mean, the U.S. didn't need the second front. We kicked out Saddam Hussein. Wonderful. I think today there's a greater sense this is going to be a long-term mess. We need boots on the ground. They shouldn't be Americans. Everybody else there has a lot more at stake. And if Turkey's not willing to be involved in a serious way, I think that may create some blowback in Washington we haven't seen yet. Again, there's an overhang there that has a lot of protectors, people who are not quite willing to give it up yet. But I do think these are the kinds of incidents that again and again remind us, I just don't understand what the alliance is here. I mean, what does it mean? What does America get out of this alliance?
Sir, come to the microphone.
I'm Sykes Managidis, a Greek Cypriot who lives in Bethesda for many years. My question is to Professor Theophanous. With the name like Theophanous, that means heavenly revelation, right? Is that correct?
You say so?
The separation of our two communities for so many years and the presence of the Anatolian Turks makes us two very distinct, more distinct communities than in the past. In the meantime, there have been a number of efforts for confidence building measures taking place. In your experience, are those measures, do we learn anything from those measures that would bring us together as a rapprochement, regardless of what solution we come out? Thank you.
Yes, that's a very complex and very important question at the same time. Let me start with the relations between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. I see maturity on both communities, in the sense that Turkish Cypriots, they had in the past, before 1974, fully identified with, almost fully identified with Turkey and against the Republic of Cyprus and the Greek Cypriots. Their experience with Turkey and the change of population in the northern part of Cyprus has made many of them believe that their survival as a separate, distinct Turkish Cypriot community lies within a united Cyprus. As a matter of fact, this is the position of the center and the center-left of Turkish Cypriot politics. Now, in relation to the settlers, yes, they have been changing the demographics of Cyprus. The older settlers, some of them have integrated in the Turkish Cypriot community. Most of them, though, they may live in separate communities, and they have not. Some Turkish Cypriot politicians and academics told me that Turkey brings them there to make sure that this issue of integration of all Cyprus never takes place. That's why I think the key to the solution of the Cyprus problem lies on changing Ankara's perspective on Cyprus. And this is not taking place. This is not taking place. I think one of the mistakes of the Republic of Cyprus was that it was not bold enough to have a roadmap. A roadmap and fundamental lines for a solution of the Cyprus question, which would have included an integrated society on the one hand, and on the other hand, fundamental pillars of autonomy and federalism. That was never put on the table. So what we had is a form of a solution which, ever if implemented, I have no doubt it will create more problems than resolve. For example, you will have a fully Turkish north and a mixed south. In the long run, even demographically, we will lose out. That's why I have. And secondly, talking about troikas, if Cyprus with a unitary state, it collapsed financially, do you think that Cyprus, a country with less than 1 million, can afford to have 3 governments with most civil employees? Who will pay? Certainly Merkel rejects that notion. So I think one of the problems is that we must have a roadmap, and although Cypriot citizens, their instinct is acute in relation to the solution of the site. They have reservations about Bison by Commonwealth Federation. The official politics, the official leadership, it stays on board, I think, out of inertia or out as an outcome of political correctness. And talking about the political system, taking into consideration the later developments in relation with the economic crisis and the mess we're into, I don't have many reasons to feel trust in what they do or what they don't do. Thank you.
Doug, I'll ask another one. This picks up on something that Professor Theophanous said. He mentioned that Turkey doesn't allow for Cyprus the same vision that Turkey wants for itself. Does this not give the United States an opportunity to strengthen the role that it's playing and the pressure that it can bring on Turkey to come to some reasonable solution on the island?
In theory, yes. What it requires, of course, is a willingness in Washington to apply that pressure. And that's what's always been lacking. I mean, again, to the extent that, and a lot of it has come from the Pentagon, I mean, in the sense that Turkey is such a very important and critical NATO ally, that it's been very hard to get any administration to be willing to kind of take the tough step to go after Turkey when the perception is there are all these other important things going on. And unfortunately, I mean, you see that in a lot of areas, I mean, whether it be kind of the name in terms of FIROM in Greece, I mean, a lot of these issues where, from Washington's standpoint, they just want the issue to go away. I mean, Washington has important things to do, and all these silly allies are coming along, and they have all these problems, and why are you bothering us? I think is kind of the attitude. And to some degree, I think that's the problem. I mean, in 1974, Henry Kissinger didn't care about the status of Cyprus. It just wasn't, from his standpoint, he just didn't care. It's not something to put a lot of effort into, and I think in the years since, it's always been that, I mean, the justice of the cause is pretty strong, but it doesn't get you real far when everybody else is talking Cold War and talking Soviets and talking, I mean, what all these other things. So I think that's the challenge, that you have to have folks in Washington willing to say that it is worth our while to take the effort to challenge Turkey, and we are prepared for the consequences. So if everyone storms out of the room, we say, fine, okay. As opposed to feeling the need to run after him and beg him to come back, which I think in the past is, when the president's referring to him as a great friend, I mean, that sends a very different message in terms of what he can expect than if there was a more arm's-length relationship, which I think today is more evident. I think Biden's comments are helpful to the extent those get transmitted to suggest to Turkey that perhaps things are changing. But I think it's that underlying, you've got to get that willingness to step over and say, we're willing to take the hassle, we're willing to make the challenge, and then we haven't had that yet.
One point. In relation to Turkey and the European Union, it's a paradox that Cyprus is a member of the European Union. Turkey aspires to join as a candidate, and yet not only does it not occupies the northern part of Cyprus, it calls the Republic of Cyprus defunct and says it doesn't exist. And things go business as usual. So Turkey has felt, Turkey feels that it has a blank check in relation to Cyprus, in the sense that, the feelings is that Turkey is a huge country, huge stakes, huge market, Cyprus is small. Erdogan many times said to the Europeans, why do you sacrifice 70 million Turks for 500,000, 500,000 Greek citizens, also putting our population down? So these, unfortunately, part of the issues in perceptions and actions.
I'd like to define pressure in concrete terms, and I think it's important for the Greek American communities to look at development. The United States and the European Union are negotiating a comprehensive free trade agreement called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Because Turkey is not a member of the EU, it is not included in these discussions and will not be included in the agreement. However, as Turkey claims, which is true, the European Union is Turkey's largest trading partner. Turkey has said that if the United States and EU conclude an agreement, the United States and Turkey must conclude a similar agreement, because Turkey will then, without that, Turkey will be placed at a disadvantage. Now, I think the response to that ought to be, that's fine, we'd love to have a free trade agreement with Turkey, except get your troops off of Cyprus, stop with the EEZ nonsense, and then fine, we'll have tons of free trade with you, and ones that won't harm you. So this is an issue that's coming up. This is an issue that's going to be fought out in Congress, because ultimately, for both the EU-American, US treaty, as well as the US-Turkey potential, have to have implementing legislation passed by Congress. And I think we may be seeing a repeat of the importance of Congress, similar to what we saw back in the times of the arms embargo.